Okay, in Docs, you can go to Docs and pull up, I think, hopefully stream information, or you should be able to see at the bottom actually, like you can see dropped frames on the very bottom bar in the bottom
Let
right.
me
It shows you
let me
how
share
long you've been
this.
streaming and then what your bit rate is and how many frames you've dropped.
Let me just share this
Yeah,
quick.
let's see.
So I have stopped streaming. So
Okay,
please
you look
enjoy.
good. I think you're streaming. You're
Okay.
live to
And
your
then how did I get the chat on there?
doc. Go to
Okay.
Docs
Oh, sorry.
in the
Hold on.
top next to View. Yeah, and then you can click Chat at the bottom,
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
and that'll pull that up.
There
You
we
can
go.
change the size and everything. And sweet. Okay, I'm gonna stop watching that.
Yeah, I'm afraid that at a certain point I'm just going to leak like
I know some
everything
kind of
that's ever been known
important
about me.
information. Yeah, yeah. We'll try to limit that if we can. uh,
Wait, is this the actual aspect ratio of
I
my
don't.
chat right
Is
now?
it tiny?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. The aspect ratio should be whatever it's kind of set to,
Okay.
like what you were seeing before you opened that. I think you just changed the size of the window.
Ah, I see. Okay. Oh, this is so cool. Okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching myself on my live. Okay.
Nice, nice,
Yeah, yeah.
classic. Love it.
All right.
All right. Well, without further ado, welcome everybody. We'd like to welcome Elijah Moore to the Ramblings of a Mad Guy stream and channel. Elijah, do you want to tell the people kind of who you are, what you do, what your interest is in this realm, topic, etc., whatever you want?
Yeah. So my name's Elijah Moore. I just got my bachelor's in science in psychology and philosophy at Iowa State, and then I just started my PhD program in psychology here in the University of Oklahoma. Good old 50s in
Nice.
education.
Yeah.
Pretty great place though. And so I specialize in, philosophical realms, I guess, but it's mostly like the pop philosophy kind of realm where I do a
Hmm.
lot of philosophy of politics and stuff that is more nebulous so that I don't have to read a bunch of books.
Yep.
And I have a new guest on every week. But my main thing that people know me for would be abortion conversations,
Right.
just because that's the most I've spent like solo content talking
Hmm.
about. So I definitely think my best conversation is abortion, among some other things. So.
I think that's interesting because I'd say I'm in the same realm where I'm not nearly as learned as you in terms of undergrad and certainly not PhD. Congratulations, that's an impressive and daunting
Don't
task.
let it fool you. It does not mean that anything cool is happening.
Sure,
So,
sure,
but yeah,
but I
yeah, yeah.
believe in you, brother. I believe in you. So,
Thank you, thank you,
my
thank you.
my thing is that I started this, at least the serious side of the channel or the more philosophical side of the channel, talking about God and doing apologetics, Christian apologetics, when I was still a Protestant. Now I don't feel as a catechumen in the Eastern Orthodox Church. I feel 0% qualified to defend the theology of the Orthodox Church. We have church fathers, and we have much better apologists than I for that. So one of the
Sure.
things that I went into was, what are practical everyday situations that I can provide a defense for in the philosophical realm, and it always goes to I think the theological realm, at least when I talk about it. And one of those things is abortion, where I don't have to pretend that I'm defending the entire faith of orthodoxy, but I can at least present the few things that I do know and yada yada yada, and come to abortion. So I've also sort of been like not pigeonholed, but like corralled, by the grace of God into this topic,
Sure.
starting from kind of a different place. And that's where I came across you, was you interviewing people on college campuses, sit down. It wasn't exactly prove me wrong. It was just, let's have this discussion. What's your side of the angle? I'll tell you my side. And I really appreciated your demeanor and the way you went about that. It wasn't aggro. It wasn't calling the other side evil and, all the rest that sometimes you do see. We're going to have a meta conversation about that later on Elijah's channel. So keep
Mm.
tuned for that. But maybe we should just get into, I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to get really quickly into philosophy and particularly ethics.
Sure.
But let's at least start with what we what we can
Yeah,
in
right.
terms
Right.
of abortion. So I guess I can give you a very basic outline of how I see the abortion argument going, and then you can tell me where you have hangups, perhaps, if you want to do it that way.
Sure. Sure.
So I would say that abortion is the murder of an unborn child, at its fundamental thing. So there's a lot to unpack in that. Or you could even say an unborn human being or whatever, something like that. So there's murder, there's humanity, there's what moral worth do we give to certain humans, individuals. Maybe I can give you an easier place to jump off of. Let me just ask you the question. Do you believe that abortion should be, legal and permitted at all stages, at certain stages, you tell me what you think in that regard.
Yeah, so for me, and I get a lot of fights with pro-choice people because I draw a pretty hard line at a capacity for consciousness.
Gotcha.
For me, I think that when we're asking, like what's wrong about an abortion or what's immoral about an abortion, it's important to focus on the harms that are existing. It's like who is being harmed, what is being harmed, are those harms being experienced? And so I would say that about 20 weeks, when the thalamocortex connects the rest of the parts of the brain together or whatever happens that, puts the brain as one cohesive unit, that's when a consciousness is deployed. And the reason why that's important is because that's when the fetus can start to experience harms. Okay. So after 20 weeks, I think it's completely immoral to have an elective abortion after 20 weeks.
Sure, and I think we can agree on that. Certainly, of course, I think it's it goes well before 20 weeks, but I can certainly see where you're coming from in that. Once, to the extent that the fetus feels the pain, experiences the pain. Now, I'm not a scientist. I think I don't know all the facts about what do you call it, the hypothalamus? Or the
thalamocortex. I've called it the hypothalamus on accident before. But,
okay, gotcha. That's my because that's the only hypo and thalamus sounds sciencey, so I'm gonna say it.
Honestly, you could make up any brain word, and most people be like,
right, of course, the hypothalamus, of course, right.
Yeah. Sure.
So that's generally known or accepted to be a kind of the seat of consciousness, or at least maybe pain experience, is this thalamus cortex.
The purpose of it is that the brain that's what connects the rest of the parts of the brain together. So the idea is that the brain parts exist before that and are formed, but they're kind of just floating around nebulously. And then it's the thalamocortex is the thing that connects the parts to make one cohesive unit, and now it's a brain as opposed to just like an amygdala floating around or whatever the parts of the brain just floating
absolutely.
Around, like
and I wouldn't be so. This is one secular abortion argument that I've kicked around and thrown, which is essentially, I don't know when life starts. And whoever I'm talking to, maybe you do, but typically I'd say you don't know when life starts or whatever. Or maybe we can make it more specific, when the value of a human life begins or something like that. I don't know. You don't know. So my instinct would be to err on the side of caution. And so in terms of, so you have these disparate parts, your amygdala and your brain and all this stuff kind of swimming around in the goop of your head, and it's not connected yet. Do we know that it all being connected is the very first moment the fetus can feel pain, feel experience, be traumatized or harmed? And if we don't know that, should we err on the side of caution and push that date earlier? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so for me, I am definitely like, as long as you're earnestly, and obviously this comes on the presupposition that you agree that consciousness is what we should be looking for, right?
Which I don't. But so that I'm sticking, I'm sticking in your realm for a second because I'm interested in this. But I ultimately I don't even care what the answer is.
Yeah, no, exactly. So
I don't even care.
But if you do accept the premise that it is consciousness, as long as you're earnestly trying to find the line between when can we reasonably assume that consciousness is there, and then how can we also give the mother the most amount of time to have an abortion if she wants. So as long as you're earnestly trying to do that, I don't mind. But you can also ask, like, is this there at conception? No. The answer is obviously no. And it's is it there at 5 weeks, 10 weeks? And you can just keep going up until you're certain.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So then I guess now I'll jump to the question which will lead us into what I really believe about where the moral worth of a human being comes from, which is why consciousness of all the things? Why not humanness, human DNA? Why not any
Sure.
other sort of element that we all share as people that have the right to life, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I would say, and there's a lot to talk about in this that I find really interesting. I would say that first of all, like inherent, even just that word, like inherent human value is not something that I feel like everybody can work with. Like there are
Hmm.
lots of different philosophical views that have nothing to do with inherent value. But
Sure.
I do think that a metric that every philosophical framework can work with is harm. And that's because it's at least nebulously measurable. Like even if you can't directly, you can put a scale to it, and you could say,
Sure.
well, even though I can't measure it, we can intuitively know that this is more harmful than this, or something like that. So we can work with it, and then
Sure.
now it's something that can be convinced of. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
think that that's where the power of consciousness comes in, is because that's when we can finally work with harms. Now, I assume that even though your framework it doesn't care about harms really at all, that you probably have a lot of questions as to what I mean by that, and
Yeah.
if there can be harms that aren't experienced and stuff like that. But again, working with this framework, that's where the importance of consciousness comes from me.
Totally, yeah. I mean, and I don't want to take us super far off track, but you could imagine, I wouldn't be thrilled if I walked into the morgue and the guy was defiling my dead grandfather, or something like
Yeah,
that. I would
yeah,
consider that to be
sure,
harmful to
sure,
just
sure,
nature itself or something like
sure.
something.
Right, right.
But then again, it's like, well, the one guy's having a great time, and I guess my grandpa don't feel
Yeah,
nothing.
true,
So
true,
that's that
true.
pathway that can kind of
If a
go down.
tree falls,
Yeah, if the
nobody
tree
hears
falls.
it. Yeah,
But then it's like there's something intuitively where you go, well, that is just wrong, right? And this is where we get
yeah,
into the
right.
moral thing. That's just wrong. Certain things are just wrong, even if it's not this conscious harm that's happening, but
Mhm.
something a little bit more ephemeral. How do
Yeah.
you respond to that? Can harm only be done to someone who is conscious or something that's conscious?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the most important form of harm is going to be that of which people who are conscious, right? Like in the
Hmm.
example of defiling the grandpa's corpse, which
Yeah.
you would be surprised how often this comes up.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That
I'm
exact
sure.
example.
Yeah, literally.
um, yeah. So, but the harms that's being done by that is by you walking in. And so, if you asked like on a desert island, and it was
Hmm.
just him and a corpse, what harms would be there? And it would
Yeah.
vastly change the types of harms that would be
Yeah.
there. But there are other types of harms that aren't experienced. I think Trent Horn does a really great example
Mm.
of this, where he says, imagine that somebody were to be born and inherit $1 million,
Ah,
but right
yeah.
before they're
Yeah.
born, it was destroyed in such a way
Yep.
that person was still harmed, even
Yeah,
though
yeah.
they did not experience the fact that the
Right.
$1 million was
Right.
taken away.
Yeah,
And
that's an
so
interesting
that
one.
harm does exist. What I would say is that foundationally, though, that harm always exists as a perceiver, though.
Mm.
Like the reason why that baby was harmed is because there will be a conscious experience that would have enjoyed the $1 million. So there is a
Hmm.
conscious experience that would enjoy the
Hmm.
$1 million. In the example of abortion, there was never a conscious experience. So from the perspective, it would be nothing and then
Right.
nothingness. So
Right. Right.
stopping that from happening would be like that harm can exist, but I don't think
Hmm.
that it can exist for the fetus just because it's never been conscious before.
Gotcha. And so now I'm picking up a presupposition, which we should get to, which is that before and after something is alive, it has no experience. Would you say that's a presupposition for your argument?
Before and after something is alive. I don't know if I'd use the word alive, like, because a
Okay.
life begins at conception.
Sure.
So like it's the fetus is definitely alive, but I would
Okay.
say that the conscious experience that we're looking for
Hmm.
begins at more specific, measurable moments that
Or
we
at least, okay,
associate
let
with the
me let
brain.
me
Yeah.
narrow in then. Let's just keep it to after. So in the example of the $1 million that you take away from the baby that does no experience of this, and but it's still being harmed, you said it's different than an abortion because that baby will grow up and could have had $1 million and could have done whatever it wanted or whatever. Whereas when a fetus is aborted, it will not grow up to have any type of experience, much less the experience of being or one of which being the experience of being harmed. But so from my paradigm, that's not true. The baby does have an everlasting soul from the moment of conception. I mean, I believe, we don't know anything about the state of anyone's salvation, But I think if anybody's going to heaven, it's little babies that did absolutely nothing wrong.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
I'll throw that out there in my priest.
Yeah, right. You're
I'll ask
probably right. Yeah.
forgiveness. I'll ask forgiveness if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, sure.
But that seems intuitive to me. So, well, the baby alive forever in heaven may forgive its mother and its father and all these things. But to me, it actually does have experience. It has as much experience as any of us have functionally because of everlasting life. Any response to that?
Yeah, I have a couple. I would say that this would be a good way, maybe just to cut off this pragmatic issue that I would say is going to be a part of our disagreement is that when you're talking about things like a soul, I think that that requires a little bit of buy-in. Like people who are listening have to agree with a lot of presuppositions about how you feel before
Yeah.
they can even be convinced of this. Whereas I feel this harm metric can be interacted with everybody. You don't have to agree with the total value that I'm giving it. You don't have to
Sure.
agree that it's the most valuable thing, but it's something that you can be convinced of and engaged with. Whereas some of these other things, I think, pragmatically just take a lot more work, and I think
Yep.
are kind of like the illegality principle. I don't know if pragmatically we can work in this realm, but I do have some theological responses to this as well. But in general, I would say that this kind of illuminates the pragmatic
Totally. And I would
disagreement
just
here.
say that just because there's buy-in to some concept doesn't mean that it's wrong, which I think you agree
Yeah,
with.
yeah,
Yeah, so like that there's pretty heavy buy-in to the idea of like, I don't know, or call it, say, atoms. Let's just keep it simple. Like, no one's seen an atom. I mean, you kind of have to trust a lot of science to buy in to a lot of
sure, sure,
stuff,
sure.
which I'm saying I do buy into, by the way. I think a lot of people do. But yeah, but there are things that have heavy buy-in, things you'll never see or interact with that we actually just take as granted. So that doesn't mean it's wrong that atoms exist because you have to actually trust the scientific method and things that you can't see and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's maybe move to your. But I agree with you. I mean, I think yes, if you're trying to say, well, what's a way I can tackle this problem that has the most wide appeal,
Yeah,
then that's fine. Unfortunately, it's kind of an appeal to the masses in a way, which I don't agree with.
yeah,
That isn't a valid
sure,
argument
sure.
for him.
Yeah,
But anyway,
it just allows for more conversation, I
more
think.
conversation is great. I love more
Yeah,
conversation. I mean, that's why we're here today, so that's awesome.
sure,
Okay,
right.
any theological points about, say, why there couldn't be a soul or why you think, are you, well, let's actually ask, what kind of background do you have religiously, theologically, agnostic, seeking, atheist? Is there any, or if you don't want to get into it, we
Oh
can
man.
find another path for sure.
No, I just say that this just opens like a whole other can of worms. What I would say is that, and this might sound contradictory, but morally, I really like Christianity and the Bible. I think that it
Gotcha.
describes morals incredibly accurately,
Hmm.
and I think it does an effective way at describing those morals.
Yep.
But I would say that the truth of God's existence is kind of irrelevant to the morals to me,
Okay.
and I don't have super particular claims. I think it's underdetermined. Like I just think
Gotcha.
that, you know, it's probably like if I were to put a percentage, it's probably 60% chance that God's real and
Yep.
everything that's described in the Bible is real, and then probably a 40% chance that he's not. So
Right.
I would say I'm probably agnostic about it, but
Gotcha.
I like the moral system and I like the way that it's codified in the Bible.
Okay, cool. Well, so then I think this is where we get into that because my question is my basic, it's not even it's somewhere between an assumption and a studied, you know, thing is that without some sort of objective lawgiver, there really is not morality. And I've actually watched your video about this, which I thought was interesting. So I'd
Oh,
like to
sure,
get
sure.
into a little bit about that because I'm not sure I totally understood every point. So maybe we can actually get into it and understand this. Because, well, actually, first let's go. Why is this relevant to abortion at all? Well, to me, it's like abortion is a fundamentally moral question. And so if we can't agree that morals like exist, then well, we can't. We're certainly not going to agree or find anything out about abortion. I think you mentioned in our pre-interview that like, oh, you think abortion isn't a moral question even. So if you have some point you want to make on that, go for it. Otherwise, we can
Yeah,
go
no, I
either way.
think yeah, I think abortion is definitely a moral question. I think what you might be alluding to is that I was saying that like your moral system doesn't necessarily matter for the conversation,
I see, because
just
of the
because I think
harm.
that harms,
Yeah,
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 just
yeah.
because I think that harms is such a,
Gotcha.
ubiquitous
Gotcha.
concept
Now I
that
understand.
everybody can
Yeah,
interact with.
okay,
Yeah.
I totally get that. Okay,
Yeah,
so
sure,
let's
sure.
go. So, I'll make a strong claim that if there is not a God, which we can unpack, but let's say
Sure.
an objective, universal sort of instantiator of morality, then our morality, what we're perceiving, this is good, this is bad, is just nothing. It's meaningless. It's preference. And you had an interesting point about preference. You could have a really, really strong preference for something. I don't know if you want to go there or you can go
Uh-huh.
anywhere with that, really. Do you
Sure.
agree that you need an objective instantiator of morality for it to have any bearing on what we should and should not do in our lives?
I don't know if I necessarily understand the claim. Like I've been
Mm-hmm.
grappling with this a lot, and I just don't understand like in that video, it's basically just consequentialism with like a few
Mm-hmm.
extra caveats, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like with the system that I'm setting up, I don't understand what is missing or what extra value is granted with the presence of a god. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why there needs to be a rule giver because to
Mm-hmm.
me the consequences of your actions are objective. They're stance independent. It does not matter what you think. The consequences of murdering somebody are out of your hands. It does not matter. There are consequences to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that our genetic wiring, our predisposition to harms and benefits requires us that those consequences are either negative or positive. And you can make a system based on that. And I don't think God needs to be involved with this unless he's the origin of that system.
Well, yeah,
So if
that's
God,
all I'm
something
saying.
like
I'm
that.
not saying God. I'm not saying it necessarily matters whether you believe in God or like whether he's present to you or like visible to any individual for their
Hmm.
morality to have these effects, like to murder equals bad and not to murder equals good or something.
Sure.
But in order for moral ethics to have any ontology, like to have any being, it has to originate from somewhere. And so the question is, if it originates, the problem is if it originates from people, which it kind of sounds like you're saying, like we just make these decisions, whether because of evolution or because of ways societies form and get along and get together, or simply what we decide in the moment, then that doesn't provide a foundation for ethics, in my view. That
Uh,
provides that's really what the claim is, more specifically
yeah,
than
I
you need
would,
to believe in
yeah.
God to be moral. No, of course, I know plenty of atheists are better than the Christians. I know, you know.
True, true.
So
Uh, I would say just like a clarifying thing is that I don't think morals come from people unless come from we can talk about what come from means,
sure,
but
yeah,
I would say that it's like natural law. I would say that it comes from the universe
okay,
and those rules exist whether God exists or not. So
gotcha.
the consequences of an action exist. Like it could be that God created the universe and then God died and then he's no longer here and the rules would still be the same.
Gotcha.
And so I feel like you should act in a specific way whether God's real or not. And so I would say that that comes from natural law, and that would come from like the existence of universal consequences.
So why should how I mean, this is the classic ought from an is, but if it's just
Mhm.
the universe, why, and it's the natural law, I mean, why should you act one way over another? It's matter and motion
Sure.
and things like that, and it's like, yeah, I guess I'm just not saying it. So so natural law is an interesting, obviously theological term that's rooted in Augustine, a deeply
Hmm.
Christian, even though he is a saint in the Orthodox Church, but sometimes the church is not afraid to say he gets things wrong. but
Yeah, right, right, right.
but he's mostly
Well,
perceived as a Catholic saint. But anyway, so natural law, like where are you finding this natural law? Because I look at nature just simply. I know I'm simplifying these actual philosophical
mhm.
terms to something, but I look
I
at
am too. So
nature. Okay,
yeah,
good, good. We can both do
yeah,
that then, and
yeah.
not face judgment from each other. Um, I look at the wasp that implants its, babies into the head of a squirrel to take it over and make, and that's
Hmm.
how it reproduces. And I say, well, I shouldn't live my life like that. But if I just looked at nature and decided where to live based on nature, you
Sure.
could pretty much pick anything. You could pick the lovely little dove hummingbird, or you could pick the, tiger, the panther, Um, so where are these laws, I guess?
Yeah, so I would say the purpose comes from, and this is probably the controversial part of my system, but
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the purpose comes from our innate wiring of
Mm.
pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. I
Okay.
don't think there is a way around this. I
Mm.
don't think that I don't think that we can do things that are against this, but I don't think that we can undercut the natural wiring of these things, especially some of these
Mm.
like logical truths. Like I broke out
Mm-hmm.
the three types of consequences,
Yeah.
and you
Right.
have like those global ones where it's like if we allowed murder and everybody murdered, that would be the antithesis of a moral system. Like that would be
Yeah.
those two could not exist. It'd be a
Sure.
contradiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We like literally can't have that. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of rules that kind of have that kind of backing. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have social things, that would be the rules that are created by people that are
Yep.
kind of just more efficiency things.
Sure.
And then you have individual things, which I think are the most powerful
Yeah.
in that, like, if I kill somebody, I've somewhat taken the easier route and
Yeah. Yeah.
cheated it, and that's unavoidable. Like you can't avoid
Sure.
that. And so I
Sure.
think that the ought comes from the ought to avoid our body's reactions to these things or our brain's reactions to these things that I would say are unavoidable.
Sure. I like that. I mean, that's better than the power stance. Like, so this
Yeah,
to me
sure.
like the if it's purely like whatever you can do and get away with, you can do, which some people do hold, not
Mhm.
many, but some people do hold that. That's where
Right.
you get into, well, I just could murder. If I can get away with it, I just could murder
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
I appreciate that it's not that, but it does still, to me, sound like the hedonism stance. So is there something more noble? Is it so in your view, then it wouldn't really be good or noble to sacrifice well, but tell me I'm wrong because I feel like you have an answer to
Sure.
this, but to say sacrifice yourself. There was I think it was a Catholic priest in Auschwitz, and they were said, okay, we need 30 of you guys. We're just going to execute 30 of you guys, and it was going to be a young mother as one of the people being executed. And this priest, he's not involved with the mother. It's not his kids. He doesn't really know these people. They're actually Jewish, and you might imagine there's some tension between that Catholic and Jewish. And he offers himself in place of the mother. She survives and ends up surviving the whole Holocaust, and he's executed for, from your perspective, what sounds like no reason, overriding his biological imperative. But to me, that guy seems noble, like more noble than
Mhm.
almost anybody. So what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. I think one that there's a very strong social incentive to encourage this kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is like if you sacrifice yourself for others, that kind of socially encourages others to sacrifice themselves for you.
Okay.
And so obviously you can't do those things at the same time, but
Yeah.
creating an environment in which that can happen. So like if I really cared about my kids, me sacrificing myself might encourage other people to sacrifice themselves for my kids. And
Right.
even though this would be like the greatest harm, which would be ending,
Yeah.
that might be worth it if you love your kids that much or if you
Sure.
love people that much, right?
Sure.
So there's the social incentive. I also think it's hard to weigh these things. Like you don't necessarily experience death in a lot of cases
Yeah.
because it's just the end of pleasure, right?
Right.
And so there might be an amount of pride or pleasure gained from sacrificing yourself that
Mm-hmm.
like outweighs the non-existence of life anymore. Stuff like this. But I think
Sure.
that the sense of nobility plays into this as well. So if you feel noble, that's like a good feeling to feel. And so there
Yeah.
might be
You might not feel it for very
some sort of
long, but
internal pleasure that you gain from that that's
yeah.
kind of difficult to track.
No,
That could be measured within the system.
I can understand that. That makes sense that there would be, you want to, even though you might not benefit from this society anymore, although truly I can't imagine why, maybe it's not a logical thing you're saying, maybe it's a biological
Sure.
thing
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
like,
And
yeah,
the biggest thing is that your expectations on how these equations bear out do not actually have to bear out in reality.
right, it
So
just
you
has to be
might
your
think that doing something is
instinct
good and then it's bad. So you
and
could
that
just
it's
be
not.
stupid, right?
Right, yeah, you could just be
But
wrong.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So then there's still a confusion here about to me about so okay, so there's these um, biosocial. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to. Someone knocked on the door. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Maybe I'll hop on and see if he's got his chat going. See if I can respond to some chat questions.
I'm just in a meeting, so can you do the other rooms until I'm done? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You can start it, Myron. Thank you.
Ramblings of a Mad Guy. Let's get this guy's thing going here.
All right, sorry about that.
No,
I hope
you're good.
I don't lose my
Yeah, fan
lose
mail
my,
or something.
But yeah, I hope I don't lose my place here. But okay, so all right, so the fundamental motivating factor is this pleasure pain thing, which maybe you hesitate to call hedonism, although I think technically that's what it is.
Sure.
So then what that leads to, what that could potentially lead to, in order to explain these sort of martyrdoms or this sort of sacrificing of all your pleasure and submitting yourself to all the pain for the sake of another whom you're not even necessarily connected to particularly, that still comes out of the fundamental biological pleasure pain dichotomy, pleasure pain dynamic. And so how does the pleasure pain dynamic get transmuted almost miraculously into your instinct, your sense of self, confirming like a martyrdom or something like that? I mean, that almost seems miraculous.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say that it's especially obvious for religious people as to why they would sacrifice themselves, because the result of sacrificing yourself is eternal life with God
Sure.
in heaven.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
when that is on the table, it makes all of these decisions way easier to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it would seem miraculous. Like I said, the origins of this system might be from a god, but it doesn't require a god to maintain it. So like they'll say that God kind of woven within our hearts intuitions about morality, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why we feel bad. Excuse me. That's why
Yeah.
we feel bad when people do certain things or whatever, that there's like an intuition woven within our hearts. That
Yeah.
could absolutely be true. But I don't think that God is required for this mortal system, if that's what you're asking. But I feel as
Gotcha.
if maybe I didn't answer your question.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, and maybe there really is no answer, but it just seems like somewhat convenient that an outcome of the pleasure pain dynamic is the opposite of that, and yet that's totally necessary to our survival as like a species. You see what I mean?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah, well,
like, do you see how it gets transmuted? Like, it turns into the pleasure pain thing turns into the exact opposite, where you submit yourself to a high amount of pain for someone else's pleasures, like some pleasure you'll never experience under that sort of under that paradigm of like there is no God.
Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of doing it more internally, like okay, there is no God, but atheists do this as well, throw themselves in front of a bus for their little kid or whatever. Like, I agree with you. I don't think you need God to have this instinct and to perform these kinds of
Yeah.
martyrdoms. It just seems convenient for the story, so to speak, that
Yeah, I would say that probably the most important thing about this metric is that the way we gather pleasure and pain is not intuitive at all. As
Right.
in, like, our instinct is to sit on the couch and do nothing all day and like eat terrible food, like
yeah,
pursue
definitely.
happiness directly. But the
Definitely,
goal,
yeah.
the direct pursuit of pleasure is probably the worst way to
Yes,
gain it.
yes,
And so
yes.
the truth of these outcomes is that sacrificing your daily pleasure for an overall pleasure is the best decision to make, right?
Right,
And this is where I say that the
sure.
Bible describes these things very well.
Really well, yeah.
And so the actual answers to the way that these things pan out
Yeah.
is not one. It might not even be accessible in a lot of cases. Like we might just like we literally might not know
Yeah,
like if
yeah,
certain
yeah.
things are better than other
Sure,
things.
sure.
Especially with questions about God's existence, heaven, and stuff like that. We might
Sure.
not even know.
Yeah.
So it might not even be accessible. So the utility of this system
Yeah.
might not even exist, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but all of that to say that I don't think that like people can make mistakes, and in fact they most often do, and I don't think that we have an accurate way of assessing these things on an intuition level.
Yeah.
The only intuition is that pleasure good, pain bad. That's like
Sure.
the only intuition that we have, and then the calculus involved to figure out what actions
Right.
cause pleasure and pain is a whole separate thing. I
Totally,
think.
totally. No, and I completely agree with you too. And so I guess my question would be, if we have an explanation for sacrifice in something like the Bible, or in the Bible, I'd say there's not really many other religious texts that have an explanation
It's one
for
of the most
sacrifice.
beautiful things about the Bible. Yeah.
And then we kind of don't have an explanation from the other perspective. I wonder why one, not necessarily yourself, but one might stick so much to the other one of which they have no explanation.
Yeah.
The thing I hear often from atheists, like, well, you don't know nothing for sure. And I go, well, you don't either. I mean,
Yeah,
so
nobody
why would
knows
you
anything
choose?
about anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's part of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, what I would say
So
is that
yeah.
I would say that there is an explanation. It would be the culmination of social and internal consequences of these
Okay.
things, whether they be temporary. I
Yeah.
would also say that a huge thing is just stupidity, like not
Sure.
understanding the consequences,
Yeah.
not fully grasping the consequences, but having a split second notion.
Yeah.
And then I
Sure.
would add to that religious martyrdom is there's a very obvious reason as to why they would do that. Whether
Yeah.
they express it or not, it would
Yeah.
be because it grants salvation or something like that. Now,
Sure.
it's not direct grant salvation, but I'm sure that that plays a role that a noble sacrifice
Yeah. I
will
mean, I think
translate into.
martyrdom is completely unexplainable given a if the martyr themselves has no expectation of something on the other side of it, on the other side of the martyrdom, or at least like a vague feeling. I think that a lot of the early martyrs probably had no like explication of like the crown that they'll be given in heaven and stuff like that, but they just knew, well, I was told to never deny Christ, and I was told about the kingdom of heaven. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I think even maybe actually even the early martyrs had a view of like it would be better to die in this world shamefully and painfully and to live in heaven forever. And they probably thought they were risking damnation by denying Christ, which perhaps they were. So that makes sense. I think that makes sense. How did we get
Yeah,
here?
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if I would agree with that. I would say that like
Yeah.
if you really wanted to push the martyrdom question to its limits,
Mhm.
you could say it fits into our system because they're just making a bad decision, is what you would say.
Uh, right.
And
They're
that
just
like
wrong. They
maybe,
were just
yeah,
wrong.
maybe the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
morality of it is whatever, but
Yeah.
the way that the equations bear out is
Right.
different from how they expected, right, or
Well,
something
it's
like
interesting
that.
because you're right. I think you would say that they did make a bad decision, and yet
Yeah,
Rome was converted to
or
Christianity by the force
yeah,
of many martyrs who all individually made the wrong decision. See, it's funny in your system, the wrong thing ends up producing its exact opposite all the time. Does that make sense?
yeah. That happens all the time. What I would say is that you have a moral imperative to kind of work things into a better situation as well, right?
Yeah,
Because imagine that
yeah,
the martyrs, like they did that, and your reaction to it was like, "Oh, those
eh,
guys suck."
yeah.
You know
Those
what I
guys,
mean? It's
yeah,
like you might
yeah,
as
yeah,
well
yeah.
make a good situation out of it,
True,
right?
true,
So,
it's true. Yeah. So
in fact, you
the
probably have a moral imperative to do that if they
definitely,
literally killed
definitely,
themselves for it. That would
hundred
suck if
percent.
you
Yeah.
killed yourself and then everyone was like, "Look at this loser."
Look at this
Like
guy,
that would be
which certainly
terrible.
a lot
Yeah.
of people did, but not the
Oh, sure,
church
sure.
itself. But not the church itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Let me let me get us on topic a
Yeah.
little bit. So, abortion. You believe that it should be curtailed after 20 weeks due to consciousness.
Mhm.
I believe that consciousness is irrelevant due to the imago Dei. Man is created in the image of God. God knits us together in our mother's womb, which is somewhere in the Old Testament. I don't have the quote on me. And
Yeah, sure.
most importantly, and I'm not sure if you heard this one, tell me if you like this. This only works for Christians. Like you have to actually be bought in for this to even apply to you.
Sure.
But Jesus Christ was fully man and fully God. And in a way, his life is what it meant to be a human. And he was conceived. We know that he was in his mother's womb from conception. So,
Mm.
what it means to be a human is to be conceived, grow up, and
Sure.
die. So, from a Christian perspective, I think I see a lot of Christians, especially Catholic, well, not especially Catholics, but a lot of Catholics that are, oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm pro-abortion. I don't know where they're getting this from. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
get that? Like,
I, Let me throw some stuff at you, and I'm actually
yeah,
curious what your
please,
thoughts on this are
please.
because
Yeah,
yeah, because I would just say fundamentally that doing a Christian run of the pro-life argument
yeah,
runs into some pragmatic issues just because of the way that our society is set up.
sure,
Even if you could ascertain the truth from it, you'd run into some pragmatic issues. But
sure.
setting all that aside, I will say that the knitting, those two phrases I hear a lot, that I knit you together in your mother's womb and then I formed you in the image of God.
Yeah,
So we'll start with the image of God one. Technically, God formed everything in the image of God. But what he's meaning to say is that humans share some quality that is similar to God, or something that humans share that no other thing shares.
Yes.
That's what I think is supposed to be meant by that passage.
Sure.
What I would say, and this is oddly convenient for my argument,
Yeah.
is I would say that consciousness is
Is the
that
thing.
factor.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
that
yeah,
X
yeah.
factor.
Sure,
And so you
sure.
can put it at humans. You could say like I made humans in the image of God,
Yep.
and then give that benefit to the fetus. But I think that the quality that God is speaking of is this conscious. That's the only thing
Okay.
that separates humans from all of other God's creations that he made in the image of himself.
I get that, and that's a position that I would have held when I was a Christian who was pro-choice in my earlier days of Christianity. That's exactly what I would have said, and in a lot of other ways, when I was also like a mystic. I'm a mystic, man.
Sure,
So
sure,
like we're
yeah.
created in the image of God, man. But I think you're exactly. I'll tell you where I think you're exactly right, which is that one of the qualities that God has that He blessed us to bestow us with is the conscious experience, a logos, the ability to think, choose. Free will is important anyway, but the logos, whatever, everything that the Greeks meant by that, God gave to us, and obviously Christ is logos, the Word of God made man. But when we say the image of God, it doesn't seem clear to me that we should limit what that means to one of the many elements that God gave us. For instance, so you could say, oh, well, God made us in his image, which means we all have hands. Well, some people don't actually have hands, actually.
Sure.
And so God made us in his image. Therefore, we all, are bipedal, like sort of mammalian things with a
Yeah.
beard and a stuff. And it's like, I think all of this is true. Like normatively, we do have all these things, including consciousness. And it's almost a mystery what the image of God means until God himself becomes a man and shows us what the image of God means. So it would be not just the consciousness, not just the hands, not just the facial hair and the hair or whatever. It would be all those things together that we see Jesus had throughout his whole life, including, from my perspective, being conceived in a womb.
Yeah, well, this would be one of those things where it's like, I wouldn't say that my interpretation of this is the obvious one.
Right,
All
right.
I would say is that I don't think that your interpretation of it is the obvious one either. I would say that
No,
this is ambiguously in favor
sure.
of something. And I would say too that with hands, other things possess hands.
Yeah,
And so
totally.
that the specific detailing of humans being made in God's image when the entire universe was created in God's image just seems like they're looking for the only thing that only humans have and God has is consciousness.
But also, you
And
could say the
so,
only thing that humans have and God has is hands and consciousness. Do you see what I mean? I'm saying you can add them all together. I'm saying,
well,
yes,
monkeys would
monkeys
have
don't have,
hands, right?
yeah, monkeys have hands, but they don't. I think we could argue, like, oh, they have this kind of consciousness or that kind of consciousness. But we know they
Oh,
don't
sure,
have the
sure.
human consciousness. Like, we know
Yeah,
they aren't like us. So I agree with you in that. It's like, we are separate
yeah.
from the other animals and to the maybe simplistically the capacity, but maybe even the style. Like really have no idea what it's like to be a monkey or an elephant or any of these kind of
That's true.
smart animals. We just have zero information, really. We know maybe
Uh-huh.
they can do a little math. Okay, great. Cool.
Yeah,
Like,
sure,
you know,
sure,
sweet.
sure,
I
sure.
mean, crows can do
Yeah,
math too, and they're
yeah.
smart. I like crows.
Yeah,
I like crows.
yeah.
So
So
I'm thinking.
no.
I mean, now I don't want to claim that I'm representing the church in any type of way, but
Hmm.
typically, what the church fathers do is read everything in the Bible typologically in the light of what's revealed by Jesus. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I don't have a
Hmm.
father to like quote right now and say like, oh, this is what they thought. But that's what the church does. So you talked about interpretation. Interpretation is really, really, really important. You can read the
Hmm.
Bible and get any position out of it because it's large and it's complex and it's nuanced. And you can come to any worldview via your own interpretation, essentially. You could be an atheist. I mean, like, literally. You could read the Bible and be like, oh, yeah, this is all meant to be a big fairy tale that we kind of, learn lessons from and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So What the church provides is a historical and traditional lens of interpretation. And so you kind of either buy into that lens of interpretation or you don't. Uh, and I'll just say that I've bought in to the interpretation for
Sure.
several reasons. But anyway, okay, so back to that. So Imago Dei, you say, well, if that just means the conscious quality that separates humans from other animals, then the 20-week date is good, even for a Christian. Like they could read it that way and
Hmm.
interpret it this way. Okay, that's interesting to me.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
and
Catholics don't have that out, who are the ones that mostly say that because they
yeah,
have a tradition
I
as
was just gonna
well.
say I feel so bad for the Catholics because it's just enshrined in the law that you
Yeah,
have to be this way. There's like
yeah,
no conversation to be had.
yeah,
So
pretty much.
anytime a Catholic comes up, I'm like, GG. Like you know what I
GG.
mean? Like
Yeah,
yeah, you
yeah.
already won. Like I just can't. There's not much I
There's
can
not
do.
much you can really say.
Yeah. What I will
Yeah.
say, another very convenient interpretation of the Bible is the
Yeah.
I knit you together in your mother's womb. You can ask the question of like when were you knit together in your
When?
mother's womb?
Yeah, that's why I have to
Yeah, and so
combine
it
that
could be
with
20 weeks as
Christ.
well.
I mean, that's why I
Yeah,
combine it with Christ. And I
yeah,
guess if you really want to nitpick, you could say, well, we don't know when he was implanted in Mary's womb. But I think
there's
there's an
yeah,
implication. At least the
dude, you
tradition
just found a
definitely
new
says.
weasel
Yeah,
strategy
exactly.
for me to.
I'm feeding you little weasel strategies. But I'd say the
Well,
tradition really does confirm his conception. I think we even call it
yeah.
that. I think there's
Well, and it's a good place to start. Like, I'm not
yeah,
saying that this is a wild or bad interpretation. I'm just saying it's not as obvious as maybe
sure, sure.
you'd think it is. And the only other thing that I would say too is the I knew you like in your mother's womb, like that
Hmm.
sentence. It's like, well, technically God knew you infinitely before you were conceived and infinitely after you die. Like he
Yeah,
knows you forever. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
obviously he stated the importance of knowing you in your womb, but
Right, right.
I'm not sure that that loses a little bit of power for me because it's like, what does God lose when I perform an abortion? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, if the baby goes to heaven and he knew him before, and if like imagine what
Hmm.
exactly is going to heaven
Hmm.
at 1 week. And it's
Yeah.
like if that consciousless entity can exist in heaven,
Yeah.
at what capacity is it there? At what capacity is God having a relationship with it? And
Sure.
you have all these questions and it's like if it's who they would have been or it's, then he could have accessed that well before conception or well after death. And
Yeah.
so you can ask the question of what does God lose from an abortion? I don't think it's anything, but I guess you could say
Uh,
that about all killing, but you know,
yes. And I
yeah.
would say, what does God lose? He doesn't lose the baby because I think you're right. There's lots of way. I mean, look, he could. We don't know. He could. Every single aborted fetus could instantly become like a seraphim or something in heaven, like just
Yeah,
transmute
sure.
into some heavenly creature that spends its whole life in heaven, its whole conscious life in
Yep.
heaven. We don't know what that would be like. So I think God certainly doesn't lose the baby. What he loses is the mother, unfortunately, and hopefully not forever,
Mm.
and hopefully not, you know, eternally, certainly. But every time we do something, every time what we call it just sin, even though it's such a loaded word, it's hard to really use. But every time we transgress against God's like sort of will, His law, His commandments, every time we sin, what we're doing is separating ourselves from God. So we see being itself is goodness. Um, it is good to be. And what evil is and sin is the negation of being. It's
Hmm.
like the vacuum space in this strange Middle Earth that we live in, where you kind of have the option to do either, to either be with God or like move away from Him. He gave us this in order to give us free will, right? So when the mother or whoever, I mean, or the doctor that convinces a mother or something, I don't want to get too graphic and dark with it.
Sure.
What he loses is that person who's decided to move away from God. Because it would be good, I think, in almost every case. In every case, it would be good to have the child because that would be an instance of existence, of being, which is good. And that's just the theology. I mean, that comes from Athanasius and sort of the early church fathers. But I think there's a lot of ways where we say, like, especially on the pragmatic angle, like, oh, well, if you're poor enough, you should be able to have an abortion because what kind of life is that for the child? And I say, what? Do you hate poor people? Do you think poor people can't have a good life? Like, I mean, or can't become, wealthy and happy and safe and all these things? That just sounds like kind of elitist to me when I hear some of the,
Hmm.
not all of them, but some of the pragmatics. Obviously, rape and incest, that's a different story for which I have a different answer. But when it's like, oh, I'm not rich enough yet. Oh, I didn't get that promotion yet. Oh, I'm not married to my boyfriend yet. Those don't seem like even pragmatic solutions to me. Those seem kind of elitist.
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure. Well, and I think that the theological angle of that kind of has the presupposition that abortion is a sin,
Yeah.
and so it's
Yeah.
like imagine you take that out and then you spin that whole thing, and it's like I think it becomes a little scary. And again, obviously, I would just say that it's ambiguous. Unless you're
Hmm.
Catholic, then it's
It's pretty clear.
it's just what
Well, in the
what it
church,
has to
in
be.
my church, it's clear too. I mean, we're told like it's a sin, like 100%.
No, sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So like,
But yeah, I would rely on the scripture to tell me this, or
yeah,
maybe like God to tell me this, or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
In our relationship, like my relationship with God, or
Sure,
something like
sure,
that.
sure, sure. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think it's a good thing either. I do think that a lot
Hmm.
of, um, sorry, when I use that word, hopefully, when I use
I know
that
what you
word,
mean.
it,
I think
it
I know
seems
what
it
you mean.
doesn't work within my system. But
Yeah,
I think getting an abortion is kind of like smoking a cigarette. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
should it be illegal? It's like, is it immoral? It's like,
yeah, yeah,
probably not, but it's not the best thing for you. Like if you're getting an abortion, you already have like all
yeah.
of these terrible events that had to have led up
Hmm.
for you to even want one. So like
Yeah.
the supposition of the abortion is bad, but also
Hmm.
like you should be strong enough to have the kid. And if you
Yeah.
aren't, that says something about you,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not advocating
Right.
for abortion, but I'm just
Right.
saying it's something
Right.
somebody should be allowed to do because of the inexistence of harms, is what I would say.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate what you're doing because you are putting a limiter on it. Like I think you would say that abortion is definitely a bad thing in the third trimester, or something like
Yeah,
that.
certainly,
Right? Like
certainly.
there's a point where it's a bad thing, and even that as a middle ground between me and someone that's like, I think you should kill them up right the second up until they're born or whatever.
Yeah.
That's better because there's a portion of the society that actually seems supports these kind of late term abortions. I don't know how often they actually happen, but it's
Yeah.
people support them. I think there needs to be voices against that.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
end up
know.
fighting with pro-choicers about as much as I do pro-lifers on
Yeah.
this concept because uh, the the concept of consent to sex equaling consent to pregnancy is a bullet that they are just unwilling to
Hmm.
bite in a lot of
Oh,
circumstances, I
yeah.
think.
I've
And
run into
so,
that. I've run into that. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's like, even though it seems kind of intuitively true, maybe the
Hmm.
word consent is too morally loaded, or
And they
maybe
just
there's a better word to be using than
yeah.
consent. But they
I
just,
know.
it just hits their skull and bounces off. They can't figure
Yeah.
it out. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it just is this is another thing where it's like nobody except, well, there's two groups of people that don't have sex, and it's incels and it's people in the church. And the incels do it in the worst possible way, and the people in the
Sure.
church sometimes do it for good reasons, sometimes don't, and sometimes they just don't do it at all, like they do have sex and stuff. But if you're
Yeah.
taking it really seriously, I mean, you're thinking about all the consequences of having sex. So for one thing, if you're just having it randomly, willy nilly, whatever, you're becoming one flesh, to keep it biblical, with someone you don't know or whatever, like someone
Hmm.
you have no information about, no, intention of continuing to be one flesh with them, and then like they move to China and you're over here, and you got this part of you that's over in China, and you're like, what the?
Sure.
And you start going crazy. So
Yeah.
I've witnessed
Yeah.
this in my own life. It's like if you have casual loose sex with people you don't know, you start to fracture your own identity into these different people. I
Hmm.
think that's a thing. But anyway, of course, the main consequence is no matter what kind of birth control you're using, no matter what you're doing, there's a chance. There just is a chance, and so I
Yeah.
think you should be able to take that consequence on if you're doing it.
Well, and the question that I'm always asking myself is how can I argue with the most people and still hate women. And so that's where the consent
Yeah.
thing comes on.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah, how can
Yeah.
like, how can I have the best of both worlds? I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
argue with religious people and still hate women. Like, it's
Somehow
so
hate
awesome,
women.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, how great is this?
What a life. What
So
a life we've carved
yeah,
out for
yeah.
ourselves
So
here.
I think it's an important thing. I guess, like, do you have a secular lens at which you can view the abortion issue? Like,
Yeah, I
it
mean,
seems as if a lot of it kind of relies on
I
a
think if
biblical
there,
lens of morality.
yeah, I think if there were no God, then not only would abortion be totally fine, anything would. I think anything, I believe in this kind of Dostoevsky quote, which I'm paraphrasing, of like, if God didn't exist, then all things would be permissible, because I just don't see who's the arbiter of these things that aren't permissible, as so long as you can get away with it, if there's no divine judge, who's perfectly just, and so yeah, I mean, certainly I can see the secular lens. I experienced it. I mean, that was my view for a long time. And you're right. That's why it's kind of annoying to have these conversations with me, because it goes to a
Yeah,
place
sure,
that the
sure.
person doesn't want it to go to.
I don't know. I
Always.
wasn't super annoyed,
Yeah,
but
no,
I
I know
could
you're
see
not.
it.
I can tell you're not, because when someone likes philosophy and just kind of discussion and kind of this second order thinking in general, usually they're fine with going to this place.
Hmm.
The TikTok group, they just want to say like,
We'll save that. We'll
we'll
save
save
that for
that for
my
the meta
show because
conversation on your
yeah,
show. Absolutely.
yeah, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. What I will say too
Yeah.
with this, yeah, damn, with
Yeah.
the general, I'm thinking about maybe going live today, but then I envision it and it makes me
Yeah.
want to pass
It's
out. But
exactly.
but with the thing, I would say that, with the morality without God, who
Hmm.
would hold you accountable? I
Yeah.
think that you could do nothing but hold yourself accountable, or the universe would
Unless
hold
you
you
didn't want
accountable
to.
in ways that are unconsensual to you, or something like that.
It's possible
Um,
that the universe would, if by that you mean society. If by that you mean like you'll get struck by lightning, then that almost is a
no,
god.
not
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah. Like that's like
but
a pagan god situation. That's like a
yeah,
Zeus
sure,
situation.
sure.
But if you mean like society plus like maybe some kind of latent
Like
like
internal
anxiety about going
consequences. Yeah,
against the herd or something like that, I can see what you mean
yeah.
by that. But if you simply don't feel that anxiety, which I think we know many people throughout history did not, and you were able to get away with it, I just don't see that you would even be doing anything wrong.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. That's a very interesting perspective because I do think that with the internal consequences, I think that to me that's the most like salient
Hmm.
way to kind of penetrate any kind of moral system is that
Yeah.
like you by taking the like easy way out and not doing like the moral thing,
Hmm.
you are losing experience that is supposed to have made you stronger.
Hmm.
And so what you can look at is like two worlds, one in
Yeah,
which you
yeah.
did the action and one in which you didn't. The one where you didn't do that action, you would be a better person.
Yeah.
And like you would be
Yeah.
more fulfilled whether you experience that or not. So you have
Right.
a lot of these like hedonistic people who are just like doing drugs all the time. They're like
Hmm.
having sex with a bunch of people and
Hmm.
they're doing all these terrible things. And from the onlooker's perspective, it might look like they're very happy. And
Yeah,
from
yeah.
their perspective, they are happy.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you
yeah.
were to take that person and put
Yeah.
it in a different situation, they would be significantly more fulfilled, living a
Oh,
more
yeah.
godly life
Yeah,
or something
true.
like that.
That's almost
And
like the
that's just
stealing the $1 million.
objective.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Completely
so,
agree. That's almost like
yeah. And so,
stealing the $1 million from the baby. And in a way, they are the baby. Like, they are being a baby. Like, if you
yeah.
just dilute
Yeah.
your mind, I mean, literally, like, you're at a rave. And I've been this guy, so I'm not even judging them. Like, I am that guy. So, like, in the past. But it's like, you're at the rave, your mind is everywhere. You're like, you do that for like
Yeah.
5 years or something like that. And you wake up and you're like, holy, I haven't grown. I'm like a little
Yeah.
child because I didn't learn nothing over 5 years, and extend that to as long as possible. Totally, totally
Yeah,
agree.
and so I think that that's always a consequence. Like that
Hmm.
is a level of being held accountable, even if you as a person don't experience it. But everybody on their deathbed has this feeling.
Hmm.
Everybody on their deathbed looks back, and whether you're like you weren't even sober for any of your life,
Yeah.
like even the people who are living the most hedonistic lifestyle on their deathbed, they ask that question about themselves and they get the answer.
Yeah.
And that's inevitable. And that's unrelated to God, I think.
I think they wouldn't.
Added to the rest of the
Yeah.
unrelated to God is in the origin might be God, but the
But
continued existence
they don't have to
doesn't
believe
be
in God for that to have that experience, or maybe that experience is imaginable without a God.
Yeah, or like
Although I'd
God
be
doesn't have to
surprised.
currently be existing
Right.
for that to be the truth. He might have
Right.
just wound us up and
Wound
then
us up and,
left,
and kind of let it go. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
exactly. Yeah.
no, I get that for sure. I would think all that sounds to me like the wisdom that you already alluded to, that God wrote His law on all our hearts rather than in ways we don't know. And I'm not saying that's proof. That's not going to convince you that God or anyone else
Sure,
that
sure.
God exists. But I'm saying all these concepts can be found in the Holy Scripture and in the lives of the saints, which is kind of, I mean, I do have a deep feeling and a knowing and an experience of God through worship in the church and stuff like that. But even if I had none of that, that would almost be good enough for me. Like you can find all
Yeah.
these good concepts and ideas that order a life towards. It's like the Pascal's wager, like taken to a thing. It's like if
Yeah.
it works in a way. Like that's
Exactly. And that's
almost
why I
that's
glaze.
like
Yeah.
yeah,
That's why I glaze the Bible. I think it's
yeah,
a wonderful like a
yeah,
description of morals and
yeah,
stuff. But what I
yeah,
would say, and this is the last point,
yeah. And
like
then we should
definitive point I'll try to make about
yeah,
this.
yeah.
But all of what you had just said was good evidence for God's existence, but doesn't actually defend why God is required for morality. Like you could say that like that all of this is evidence for the initial existence of morality, but none of this is evidence for the continued existence of morality. And if the world just spawned in whatever way the Big Bang Theory describes it
Yeah,
as,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And all of these morals would still be there in the way that I'm describing it. And so
Yeah.
you have two theories, both of which create the existing morality now, but neither of which require a God. And all of the utility of believing in a God to effectuate these morals is good. And it's proof for God's existence, but it's not proof for morality's existence. That's
Okay.
a kind of a separate thing, is what I would say.
Well, I would say, I mean, morality, and this is like, we can just, I guess, briefly, we don't have to like fully get into this, and I'll concede whatever after this, but like morality to me seems mind dependent. Like it seems like a mind dependent. It's a concept. It's not really a thing in nature that you can look at under a microscope. It's not empirical in a way. But I think you're right that if it exists at all, it would have to exist at a time like the Big Bang, like at the beginning of time. But what that would require is a universal mind for which it depends on. So that's tag. I mean, this is the beginning of tag, and that's like a whole other, the transcendental
sure.
arguments
Well,
for God. But like,
yeah. And that's what I would say that like its origin is good.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
the origin of it being God, I would be like, yeah, sure, of course.
Sure,
Yeah,
fine.
but
Yeah.
what I would say is that it exists just like 2 + 2 as a
Yeah. Well,
logical,
I would agree
like
with
it
that.
exists in logic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Morality does, but that doesn't require God's existence right now. And it doesn't require you to believe in God, but it might have required God to have existed at the Big Bang, or maybe the Big Bang made it, or something like that. But
Yeah, but as
that's
long as
kind
the
of what
Big
I'm trying
Bang
to say.
was a universal mind in this like paradigm, because like logic, math, all these things, these are things that all conceptual, like mind dependent. So if they pre-existed any minds like on Earth or aliens or anything, like the seconds after the Big Bang or something, there had to be a mind for which they depend on. Does that make sense?
Um, uh, I think because this is like the
I know this is where it
concept.
gets to.
Actually, yeah, this is
What
very
is a
metaphysical.
concept? Yeah, this is where it
Right,
gets
because
very
gravity
metaphysical.
existed before minds could perceive it, right? And so it's like, you know what I mean? It's like hard. Yeah, I get what you're saying, though. I get
That's
what
a
you're saying,
totally
but
different conversation anyway,
yeah,
so we
yeah.
don't have to get into that. I'll just throw that out there. Have you ever come across, just as a final casual, have you ever come across Jay Dyer in your philosophical sort of
I know
YouTube
the
adventure?
name, but what you'll find is that I haven't read a goddamn thing on
Oh,
it.
that's
Like I got
fine.
my
I
degree in
don't
it,
read
and I
nothing.
somehow passed without reading anything.
Well,
So
good, because Jay Dyer, he reads everything, but he's not really like accredited. I mean, he has one peer-reviewed paper from when he was like, but he never got his PhD or whatever. But he does a great job of explaining tag, that argument that I was just making.
Yeah.
to all sorts of different types of people. And so you can kind of identify with anyone he's debating against and then see how you hold up or how what you would disagree
I
with on
see.
his end or whatever on the other guy's end. And it's a really difficult thing. It's a paradigm level argument. So it's circular, but it has to be circular. It acknowledges that all of our arguments are all of our paradigms start from circularity.
Oh,
Which ones
yes.
actually incorporate the most elements of reality that we all experience and acknowledge to be true, given that they all start from this kind of unknown circularity. Anyway, it's something for if you're interested in some private research or whatever for
Hmm.
later. Mighty Sarlacc, what's up? Great to see you, man. You're coming in right at the end of our thing here. This is in my chat. He goes, okay, so if morality depends on a universal mind, then that would be subjective, right? Well, no, that would be a category error because what does it mean for a subjective, objective mind experience? So there's one objective
Yeah.
mind. He has a subjective experience, but he's the objective mind. So, okay, fine, it's subjective, but his subjective experience is objective reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of like what would the word morality mean
Yeah.
if people weren't here?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's what a concept is. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We're trying
Yeah.
to think about a principle or a
A
concept,
principle.
right? And so
Yeah.
you could say that it's subjective just because it has to stem from a experience, but it's
Right.
like you're losing the value of the word subjective when you
Yeah.
say that
It
because
starts to
that's the
mean
only
nothing.
way that this exists
Yeah,
is within a
exactly.
mind. So
Exactly. Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't touch it,
Yeah,
so
right, 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 right. Yeah. So thank you, Mighty Sarlacc, and thank you for watching. But more importantly, thank you to Elijah Moore, please. Round of applause in the chat
thank
for
you. Thank
joining
you.
us and having a beautiful and enlightening discussion, both about philosophy, morality, abortion. I recommend anybody. I'm gonna post because sometimes my internet's bad. Like I was taking a recording of this whole thing, so I'm gonna
Hmm.
post the raw recording. Maybe cut out the very start where we're like figuring stuff out
Yeah,
onto
sure.
YouTube. I'll do that today so people can go back and watch that. You guys can like, comment, subscribe. That'll be great. Please go to Spotlight with Elijah Moore. That's his channel. I'm gonna be on it on Friday. We're gonna have a different discussion,
Hmm.
which will be equally interesting. And he does a lot of stuff with philosophy, some abortion stuff, some morality stuff, and has very interesting looking guests and things like that. Anything you'd like to leave us off with here, Elijah?
No, thank you so much for coming on and like talking with me because like I said, I think having conversations like this where people are willing to just get into the weeds and talk about these things is difficult. Where
Yeah.
I feel safe expressing the things that I
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, right, right,
A very, very
right.
powerful thing to be able
Yeah.
to replicate. So thank you for the platform to do
My
that.
pleasure, man. My pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Talk to you on Friday.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
All
Yes.
right, peace. Glory to God. Glory to. How you guys doing? We can maybe hang out for a sec here. Let me. You got any comments, Mighty Sarlacc? Seemed like you. Wait, how many times do we got to talk about that objective, subjective God thing? Haven't we? Have we not gone over that? I'm in a good mood today. I just had a great conversation. That was awesome. Let's see. There I am. Had a great conversation with our friend Elijah Moore. I just saw one of his videos randomly on my For You page, like whatever, my recommended feed. And, he was just respectful debater about abortion. And, I think we got into it. We stalled out where I expected us to stall, which is does God does God need to exist for morality to exist? That's where we got to at the very end. But like you could tell we'd already been talking for an hour. I didn't want it to be respectful of its time because I only said we were going to use an hour. So we kind of got into the main crux of whether abortion is good or but that's good. Maybe that'll set up future conversations or you know uh, or maybe even launch him into some reflection. Now I sound like a dick, right? I'm not trying to be like, well, I was going to school him if he gave me 20 more minutes. I'm not saying that. He must reflect on my wisdom. No, I'm not saying that at all. I just showed him I gave him Jay Dyer. He can do whatever he wants with Jay Dyer. Um, I have some reflection to do about his perspective, certainly. Ontology. Great. Then I'm going to kill you. Yeah, morality has no being. So I guess we just get to do whatever we want. I mean, I'm not trying to be a dick to you, Mighty Sarlacc, but morality must exist. It must have some ontology. It must have a nature of being. The question is whether it exists just for like humans, like just in our heads as like a fiction that we make up, or whether it exists really, objectively, as in at all times, in all places. And if it, then beyond that, if it just exists in human minds, then it's arbitrary. So one morality can't be compared to another morality as being better than the other because that's the thing in question: goodness, betterness, right? But if it exists objectively, then one person's morality can be better than another's. And I think it's pretty clear that, say, your sense of what's right and wrong is better than Adolf Hitler's. And if that's true, then there must be something meta ethically that allows you to say that, right? So that's that pretty much. Unfortunately, I got to go. We just wanted to stream the conversation, I should get back to streaming. I have 3 new jobs. I guess I'll explain. I'll use this time to explain myself. I have 3 jobs before. When I was streaming before, I had 0 jobs. 0 jobs. I was blessed with the ability to not work at all. Now, in this new year, I have 3, we can call it 3.5 jobs. So I went from 0 to 100, and streaming has taken the back burner. So I apologize for that, but I still want to keep doing stuff. Like, I still want to put out these conversations and stuff. So it's just going to have to be a little more irregular. I hate to say it, but I think it just has to be. And I don't really hate to say it because I'm excited about my 3 other jobs. Like, that's real life, That's real. This is real-ish, but it's not that real. Like, literally, it's virtual. You don't even know that I exist. I could be an AI. I could be like an AI furry. Like, like, actually, I'm a furry. Like, I'm wearing the dog head mask and, like, the big animatronic paws. But I use AI to make myself look like this. That could be what's happening. You don't know. You have no idea. I could have made up Elijah. I could have invented him. Although I couldn't, because he was a very smart guy that I wouldn't have those ideas that he has. So anyway, that was a little tangent at the end there. Hey, what would Ramblings of a Mad Guy be if I didn't accuse myself of being a furry every now and again at the end of a philosophical discussion? It'd be nothing. The show would be nothing. All right. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. Glory to God. Glory.